when people start calling me names or whatever, then I really, the
I
credibility
didn't
of
call
your
you any
argument.
names, sir.
It's that.
I didn't call
Okay,
you any
well,
names.
whatever. Okay. I
What
think
was the
that
name that I called you?
All right, guys. Today we're diving into a great debate hosted by Piers Morgan featuring Andrew Wilson, Dave Smith, and let's be honest, two guys who sound like deep state mouthpieces. Andrew and Dave come in swinging with cold hard facts while the other side melts down and clings to the same tired talking points.
but the amount of money that the United States has spent or contributed towards helping Ukraine, the overwhelming majority of that money was spent in the United States. It's not pallets of ammunition of money that are loaded onto a C-17 and then delivered into Ukraine. It's money that is spent replacing or buying ammunition, refurbishing old equipment that is then loaned or given to Ukraine. And of course, there are no U.S. troops in Ukraine except for those officers that are assigned to the embassy in the Office of Defense Cooperation, whose task is to make sure accountability of every javelin, every artillery round, every set of binoculars. Oh, you can shake your head if you want to. That's a fact. So
Why don't you
I
stop
think
pretending that we don't have United States Special Forces on the ground right this second? We don't have CIA agents all over Ukraine right this second. Why don't you just stop pretending? Because it's nonsense. And we all know it's nonsense. This is the way, hang on. This is the way it's been going for a long time. And when you talk about, well, Andrew, what we're actually doing is we're spending a whole bunch of money on refurbishing equipment here instead of buying new equipment to send over there. So what? So what? You're still spending tons of my money on something I don't care about to send over to a nation which is corrupt as hell. So can we just stop BSing each other for a second? Yes, the United States has boots on the ground there. Yes, we have special forces units there. We have CIA agents there, and we would be fools to pretend we don't.
it's an interesting argumentative style that you had. And, I always, when people start calling me names or whatever, then I really, the
I
credibility
didn't
of
call
your
you any
argument.
names, sir.
It's that.
I didn't call
Okay,
you any
well,
names.
whatever. Okay.
What was
I
what
think
was
that
the name that I called you?
I think that the key is this idea of trying to
Perhaps you're
end the
just
war.
offended by tone. You just don't like tone. Maybe a little tone policing getting worked in there. Maybe that southern drawl where you try to make yourself sound likable because you have it doesn't work so well on me because you can't gaslight me with this stuff. It's nonsense. Yes, there's boots on the ground there. Yes, there've been boots on the ground there probably since the beginning. Yes, we're spending $100 billion plus on equipment that we then either send over there. And by the way, there's hidden money going over there too. This is such nonsense. Just stop gaslighting the American people. Stop it. We're not stupid. We've seen this on repeat so many times now. So many times.
General,
So
respond.
the idea of ending the war, of course, is exactly what we would like to do, but it needs to be an end that is sustainable. And I think President Zelensky understands that he can't just sign or accept an end to the war where Russia will wait for us to lose interest, because we always do lose interest, and then they pick right back up with a resumption of the conflict after we have left or turned our back. And so I think it's reasonable to expect the Ukrainians to want some sort of guarantee, whether that's continued aid, continued equipment, or presence. They haven't. I don't know exactly what that looks like. Obviously, I would prefer to see Ukraine in NATO. We get better the day they join NATO. It's not going to happen anytime soon, especially if the United States is not willing to do it. And the Biden administration also is not willing to do it. But how do we end it when you're the partner on the other side, negotiating partner on the other side of the table is Vladimir Putin? I mean, there's no reason to have confidence that they will live up to any agreement because there's nothing in their history. And I do appreciate that Andrew likes my North Florida accent.
Andrew Wilson calls it like it is. He says, let's stop pretending, stop twisting facts, and stop bullshitting the American people. Then the general pulls a classic deflection move. Don't call me names, even though no one said anything. No one called him a name. He just couldn't handle the truth being laid out, and he tried to weasel out of the debate by playing the victim. Then you've got the general chiming in with the same tie line. We love to end the war, but we just can't trust Putin. Oh, really? Is that supposed to be some groundbreaking insight? Since when do world leaders trust each other? That's not the issue. What he really means is we can't afford peace, not with billions of dollars in defense contracts foreign aid, kickbacks, and military-industrial complex deals riding on endless conflict. Peace doesn't fill their pockets. War does.
Well, let me bring in Dave. I want to bring in Dave. I want to bring in Dave. We've got.
Yeah, I never quite understand this argument that seems to just logically fall apart, that we can't end a war because the war might pick up at some point in the future, and therefore, if we don't have a perfect guarantee that, I mean, what, even if it, I mean, I don't know. I've heard the entire time through this war, including on your show, Pierce, that if Putin was successful in Ukraine, then he was going to move on Poland, right? Like, this is what Joe Biden kept saying. This was the official, like, you know, fear mongering of this war. And so if you're telling me that even NATO membership isn't a guarantee, then yes, we never have a perfect guarantee. By the way, you also don't have a guarantee from any government in the history of the world. That doesn't mean that ending a war isn't still a positive. And I just want to go back to what was, you know, brought up initially. You know, the idea that this was a case of failed deterrence, and that if only we had deterred Vladimir Putin sooner, then we could have avoided this whole thing. I mean, let's just kind of quickly overlook the last 20 years of U.S. foreign policy in Europe. We've expanded NATO all the way to Vladimir Putin's borders. We constantly floated out the idea for years that we would include Ukraine at some point, give them full membership. We said point blank in 2008 at the Bucharest summit that we were bringing Georgia and Ukraine into NATO before Russia ended up going to war with Georgia there. And then we I mean, look, Pierce, like we've done this before on the show too, right? But just imagine, if you can, have a little bit of strategic empathy and put yourself in the Russians' shoes. If Russia, let's say the Soviet Union had never collapsed, and the Soviet Union had poured $100 million into a Mexican street protest that overthrew a democratically elected government, and they had been saying for years they were going to bring Mexico into their military alliance, and then when the new government came up, they recognized them immediately and started arming them, as Donald Trump foolishly bragged about the other day with Zelensky in the Oval Office. Pierce, do you think Americans would feel that was deterrence, or do you think we might view that as a provocation? I mean, like, it's just,
Stop
by
using
the way,
logic,
when
Dave.
Donald
Stop
Trump,
using logic, Dave.
well, look, when
Well, let me ask.
Donald
Well, rather
Trump
than me,
was-
rather
Well,
than me
very
try and
quickly,
answer a
very-
very logical question, let me get Jake to respond to that.
So the first thing that he said, what is the concern if Russia takes Ukraine? If Russia can't even go 60 kilometers deep and take the city of Pokrovsk, what is the threat to NATO? And it's, yes, absorbing a country of 40 million people, absorbing a country that has $10 trillion of natural resources under the ground. It's the strategic location on the Black Sea. If Russia absorbs Ukraine, they will Russify the people. They will annihilate the Ukrainian identity, turn them into Russians, and then start press ganging them into the military and send them into meat wave attacks against the Baltics, against Poland and the Suwalki Gap. We're trying to prevent Russia from getting stronger. And I don't care about what Russia thinks or feels. Russia is not a great power. Russia has an economy the same size roughly as Spain. Do you think Spain is a great power that the United States should respect?
Exactly, dude. Listen, we are in the business of trying to be a world empire, and we're going broke. We're $36 trillion in debt because we can't afford to do it. We've blown $8 trillion in the last 20 years on foreign wars.
Why is Donald Trump talking about invading Greenland? Why is Donald Trump talking about invading
I don't
Panama?
agree with
Why
that.
is Donald Trump talking about annexing Canada? Why is he talking about ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip?
Conversation.
That is empire.
See, you lost
Total red herring.
is the one
Stay on
pushing
topic,
for
Liv.
America to be
you
a
lost
global
the
empire.
point.
Liv,
And
that's
now
a
you're
total
moving.
red herring. Total red herring.
Total
red
completely.
herring.
And by the way, I don't
Like-
support.
like,
I don't support
go
Donald
Is
after
the
Trump.
guy
the
who
argument.
smokes and spends all day arguing with strippers and OnlyFans girls going to speak up? I don't know
They
who
make
this
better
guy
arguments
is.
than you do,
General
bro.
Ben Hodges,
It's not my fault
thank
that you
you
have
so
a
much
low
for your
IQ,
service to
lower
this
IQ
country.
than a stripper
You're
and
a
an
hero.
OnlyFans
You're an
girl.
expert. These other guys, I can't take them serious.
Dave Smith and Andrew Wilson absolutely bring the fire in this debate. He says it out plain and simple. We armed Ukraine, we provoked Russia for years, and now we're supposed to act shocked that they responded? Then he hits them with the perfect analogy. If Russia had done to Mexico what we did to Ukraine, we'd lose our minds. And he's right. In response, the other side throws out a bunch of fear tactics. If Russia takes Ukraine, they'll force a population into their military, they'll invade the rest of Europe. Give me a break. There's no real substance behind that. Just the usual scaremongering to justify endless war spending. And when they can't refute the facts, they go for personal jabs. One guy completely out of the argument starts mocking Dave instead of addressing the points because that's all he's got. It's a classic liberal tactic. When logic fails, resort to cheap insults. You know, someone's losing when they're trying harder to land a punchline than a point.
Okay, well, I mean, listen, you just couldn't
okay.
respond to my point at all.
You need to have the right
dude.
pedigree in order
you
to make an argument, bro.
Say that you can't take me seriously, but you just completely didn't. You had no response to the argument. Listen, the current estimate I've seen is that Russia's GDP is about $2 trillion a year. Try to keep perspective on this. That is less than a third.
Is Spain a great power that we should respect? Is Italy a great power that we should respect?
Well, aren't we all missing? Okay, let me bring the
on.
elephant in the room into the debate. Nobody's mentioning the nuclear arsenal that Russia has. That's what makes it different to any of these other countries. Russia, on its own, has more nukes than any other country, including the United States. That is a fact. There are, I think, 9 countries in the world that have nukes. The UK has some. France has some. There are American nukes at a number of other European countries. But let's be clear, when it comes to deterrent, there's probably only one deterrent that Putin really cares about, and that is a nation that is nuclear armed. And when I interviewed, and I'll bring the general in here for this, when I interviewed President Zelensky 2 weeks ago, he did say, as part of the security that he wanted, maybe we could have our nuclear weapons back, because of course, when Ukraine became an independent country, they had a lot of Russian nuclear missiles on their territory, a lot. And they agreed to give them all back to Russia, but only because Russia, America, and the UK gave undertakings that they would be guaranteed defense. And that hasn't materialized. And so you could argue, if you go right back to the start of all this, from when Ukraine went out on its own, had they been allowed to keep some of those nuclear missiles that were Russian-owned but were on Ukraine territory, had they been able to keep them and remain a nuclear power, that might have been the only thing that would have deterred Vladimir Putin. Now,
I love Piers Morgan reminding everyone about the real elephant in the room, nuclear weapons. And he's absolutely right. The only thing truly keeping the peace is MAD, mutual assured destruction. That's the grim reality. But here's the kicker. Ukraine gave up its nukes because the US and UK and Russia guaranteed their security. And how did that work out for them? Now their entire existence depends on endless U.S. funding. Bottom line, this war was preventable. We provoked it, we escalated it, and now we're doubling down with no off-ramp, no accountability, and no plan for peace. The establishment is lying straight through their teeth and calling it leadership. So I'll ask you this, how many more billions will it take before Americans finally say enough? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you're done being gaslit by warmongers in suits.